The first gunshot sent Sage Crawford diving behind the water trough outside the general store, her heart pounding against her ribs like a wild Mustang. Durango, Wyoming Territory, 1878, was no place for a woman alone, especially one with child, but she had nowhere else to go after her brother's passing left her with nothing but debts and distant memories of a family back east who'd disowned her for her shameful condition. "You best clear out of town, Miss Crawford," shouted Sheriff Mills from across the dusty street. "That's Brody Thornton riding in, and he ain't in a charitable mood." Sage peered over the rim of the trough, water soaking the hem of her already tattered dress. The infamous Brody Thornton, with his dark reputation stretching from Texas to Montana, sat atop his midnight stallion at the far end of Main Street. Even from this distance, she could see the hard lines of his face beneath the shadow of his hat. His broad shoulders tense as he surveyed the scene before him. Another shot rang out, this one from the saloon, and Sage ducked down again, hands protectively covering her swollen belly. She was 7 months along, alone in the world, and now caught in the crossfire of whatever grievance brought the feared cowboy to Durango. "I ain't leaving till I find the man who stole my cattle." Thornton's voice carried through the tense silence that followed the gunfire. Deep and rough as gravel, it sent an unexpected shiver down Sage's spine. What happened next occurred so quickly that Sage would later wonder if she'd imagined it. A drunk cowhand staggered from the saloon, pistol raised. Before he could fire, Thornton's gun flashed in the sunlight. The shot was clean, hitting the man's hand rather than taking his life. "Next one goes between your eyes," Thornton warned, holstering his weapon with practiced ease. "Now tell me where I can find Jonathan Pierce." Sage gasped audibly. Jonathan Pierce, the very man who had abandoned her upon learning of her pregnancy, promising marriage only to disappear with what little money her brother had managed to save. The very man whose child now grew inside her. Thornton's head snapped in her direction at the sound, steel blue eyes finding hers across the distance. For a moment, the world seemed to stop as their gazes locked. Then, another commotion erupted as Pierce himself burst from the back of the saloon, making a desperate run for the livery. Thornton spurred his horse forward, but Sage, acting on impulse born of months of abandonment and desperation, stepped into his path. "Please," she called up to him. "Whatever he owes you, it's nothing compared to what he owes me." Time seemed to suspend as the fearsome cowboy looked down at her from atop his horse, taking in her condition with a single sweeping glance. His jaw tightened, a muscle flexing beneath the stubble on his cheek. "Get out of my way, madam," he said, voice low but not unkind. "He's the father," Sage replied, gesturing to her belly. "And he left me with nothing but shame and his unborn child." Something shifted in Thornton's expression, a flicker of something that might have been compassion in another man, quickly masked by determination. "Then it seems we both have business with Mr. Pierce," he said, extending a gloved hand down to her. "Care to join me?" Against all reason, against the whispered warnings of the townspeople who had gathered to watch, Sage took his hand and found herself pulled up behind him on the great black horse. As they thundered toward the livery in pursuit of Jonathan Pierce, she wondered if she had just made the wisest decision of her life or the most foolish. Pierce had a head start, but Thornton's stallion closed the distance quickly. They caught up to him just outside town, where the terrain opened to scrubland dotted with juniper and sage. Pierce's horse, clearly exhausted from a hard ride, was slowing despite its rider's frantic urging. "Hold on," Thornton instructed, and Sage tightened her grip around his waist, feeling the solid warmth of him through his worn denim jacket. Despite her predicament, despite the jolting ride that threatened her precarious condition, she felt strangely secure with this stranger, this man whose reputation spoke of violence and retribution. Thornton drew his horse alongside Pierce's and, in a move that left Sage breathless with its audacity, leaped from his saddle to tackle the fleeing man to the ground. They rolled in the dust, fists flying, until Thornton pinned Pierce beneath him. "You stole 30 head of my best breeding stock," Thornton snarled, pressing his forearm against Pierce's throat. "But I'm thinking that's the least of your crimes." Sage slid awkwardly from the horse, one hand steadying herself against its flank while the other cradled her belly. Pierce's eyes widened when he saw her, recognition and fear washing over his face. "Sage," he croaked, struggling against Thornton's weight. "What are you doing here?" "Looking for you," she replied, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. "You promised to marry me, Jonathan. You promised to come back." Pierce's face contorted with desperation. "I was going to, I swear. I just needed money first. That's why I took his cattle. I was going to sell them and come back for you." "Liar," Thornton growled, pressing harder until Pierce gasped for breath. "You sold those cattle 3 months ago in Denver. Spent the money on gambling and women." The confirmation of what Sage had already suspected still cut deep. She had been a fool to believe in Jonathan's promises, to think that the tenderness he'd shown her had been anything but a means to an end. "Is it true?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. Pierce couldn't meet her eyes. "Sage, you don't understand." "I understand perfectly," she interrupted, a lifetime of disappointment hardening her voice. "You're a coward and a thief, Jonathan Pierce, and I want nothing more from you." Thornton glanced up at her, surprise evident in his expression. He had clearly expected tears, pleas for mercy on Pierce's behalf. Instead, he saw a woman whose spine had been forged in hardship, whose eyes reflected not heartbreak but resolute strength. "What do you want me to do with him?" Thornton asked her, and the question caught Sage off guard. This notorious cowboy, feared throughout the territory, was asking for her input. "Justice," she said after a moment. "For both of us." Thornton nodded, hauling Pierce to his feet and binding his wrists with a length of rope from his saddlebag. "We'll take him back to town. The sheriff can hold him until the circuit judge arrives." As they made their way back to Durango, Pierce on foot between them, Sage riding Thornton's horse while he led it by the reins, she studied the man whose reputation had preceded him. Up close, she could see that his face, though weathered by sun and hardship, was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps 30 at most. The harshness she'd glimpsed from afar was tempered by something else, a sense of honor that belied the stories that followed him like shadows. "Why did you help me?" she asked as the town came back into view. "You could have just taken him in for the cattle." Thornton was quiet for so long that Sage thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer than before, though no less deep. "My sister was in a similar situation once. No one helped her." The simple statement revealed more than a lengthy confession might have. Sage nodded, understanding that some wounds need not be spoken of to be seen. "Thank you," she said. "Whatever else happens, I'm grateful for today." "Don't thank me yet," he replied. "Life doesn't get easier from here." It was a harsh truth, but Sage appreciated that he didn't offer false comfort. As they entered town, the stares of the townspeople followed them, some curious, others judgmental. Sage held her head high. She had survived worse than their scrutiny. Sheriff Mills met them outside the jailhouse, his expression a mixture of wariness and respect as he addressed Thornton. "I see you found your man." "And more," Thornton replied, nodding toward Sage. "This lady has charges of her own against him." Mills frowned, clearly uncomfortable with the complexity of the situation. "The judge won't be through for another 2 weeks. Then he'll wait in your jail until then," Thornton said, his tone brooking no argument. After Pierce was secured in a cell, Sage found herself standing awkwardly on the boardwalk outside the jailhouse, uncertain of her next move. Her meager possessions were in a room above the laundry where she'd been working in exchange for lodging, but even that arrangement was tenuous at best. "Where are you staying?" Thornton asked, coming to stand beside her. "Above Wong's laundry," she replied. "But Mrs. Wong has made it clear that once the baby comes, I'll need to find other accommodations." Thornton was silent for a moment, studying the dusty street as if it might offer solutions. "My ranch is half a day's ride from here. I have a cabin that my foreman used before he built his own place. It's empty now." Sage stared at him, trying to decipher if this was an offer or merely an observation. "Are you suggesting I stay there?" "I'm suggesting you need a safe place until that baby comes," he said, meeting her gaze directly. "And after, if you've nowhere else to go." "Why would you do that?" Sage asked, suspicion warring with desperate hope. "You don't know me." "I know enough," he replied. "I know you stood up to a man when most would have cowered. I know you're carrying a child that deserves better than to be born in a laundry room." He paused, seeming to consider his next words carefully. "And I know what it's like to be alone when the world turns its back on you." There was no pity in his eyes, only a simple understanding that spoke to something deep within Sage. She had been fighting for so long against poverty, against judgment, against the fear that had become her constant companion. "I don't want charity," she said finally. "Good," Thornton replied, "because I'm not offering any. The cabin needs work, and my housekeeper could use help with the cooking and mending. You'd earn your keep." It was more than fair, it was a lifeline. Yet Sage hesitated, aware of what the townspeople would say about a woman in her condition living on the property of a man like Brody Thornton. "People will talk," she said. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "People always talk. Question is, does their talk put food on your table or a roof over your head?" Put that way, the decision seemed clear. "When would we leave?" "I have business in town until tomorrow. We can leave at first light, if that suits you." Sage nodded, feeling as though she were stepping off a cliff into unknown waters. "Tomorrow, then." Thornton touched the brim of his hat in a gesture of respect. "Until tomorrow, Miss Crawford." As he walked away toward the livery, Sage watched his retreating figure and wondered at the strange turn her life had taken. Hours ago, she had been hiding behind a water trough, fearing for her life. Now she was preparing to leave the only town she'd known since arriving in the territory, to live on the ranch of a man whose very name caused hardened men to tremble. Yet as she made her way back to the laundry to pack her few belongings, Sage felt something she hadn't experienced in months. Hope. It was fragile as a bird's wing, but it was there nonetheless, fluttering in her chest alongside the movements of her unborn child. Dawn broke crisp and clear the next morning, painting the eastern sky in hues of gold and rose. Sage had slept little, her mind racing with questions and second guesses. But as she stood outside Wong's laundry with her single carpet bag and a small bundle of food Mrs. Wong had insisted she take, her resolve was firm. Brody Thornton arrived precisely as the sun cleared the horizon, leading not only his stallion but also a gentle-looking mare with a side saddle. He dismounted and approached her, his movements fluid despite his imposing stature. "Morning," he said, taking her bag without ceremony. "Sleep well." "Well enough," Sage replied, though the dark smudges beneath her eyes likely told a different story. He nodded, seeming to understand what went unsaid. "The mare's name is Daisy. She's steady and won't give you any trouble." With his help, Sage mounted the horse, arranging her skirts as modestly as possible given her condition. Thornton checked the cinches once more before mounting his own horse. "Ready?" he asked, and at her nod they set off. The journey to Thornton's ranch took them through stretches of open prairie interspersed with stands of pine and aspen. Though the autumn air held a bite, The sun warmed Sage's face as they rode. Thornton proved to be a taciturn companion, speaking only when necessary, but his silence was not uncomfortable. It gave Sage time to absorb the beauty of the landscape, so different from the cramped confines of Durango. As the sun reached its zenith, they stopped by a clear stream to rest the horses and eat a simple meal of jerky, biscuits, and dried apples that Thornton produced from his saddlebags. "How much farther?" Sage asked, massaging her lower back where the ride had begun to take its toll. "Another couple of hours," he replied, watching her with a sharpness that missed nothing. "We can rest longer if you need." "No," she said quickly, not wanting to appear weak. "I'm fine to continue." Thornton studied her for a moment longer, then nodded. "The land changes up ahead, gets prettier." It was perhaps the first personal observation he'd made, and Sage seized on it. "You sound like you love it." "I do," he admitted. "Fought hard for it. Nearly died for it more than once." "How long have you had your ranch?" she asked, curious about this man who had so unexpectedly entered her life. 5 years, he said. "Was nothing but overgrazed land and a falling-down cabin when I bought it. Previous owner ran it into the ground, then lost it to drink and cards. And now," a hint of pride crept into his voice. 2,000 acres, 300 head of cattle, some of the finest horseflesh in the territory, and a house that doesn't leak when it rains. Sage smiled at that last part. "Sounds like you've built something to be proud of." "It's a start," he said, but she could see that it was more than that to him. It was everything. As they continued their journey, the land indeed began to change, rising into rolling hills dotted with ponderosa pines. Wildflowers still bloomed in protected pockets, splashes of late-season color against the tawny grass. And then, as they crested a particularly high ridge, Sage caught her first glimpse of Thornton's ranch spread out in the valley below. A substantial log house anchored the property, smoke curling from its stone chimney. Several outbuildings clustered nearby: a barn, bunkhouse, smokehouse, and what appeared to be a blacksmith's forge. Corrals held horses, and in the distance, cattle grazed on the autumn gold pastures. A creek wound through the property, its banks lined with cottonwoods whose leaves had turned bright yellow with the season. "It's beautiful," Sage breathed, genuinely impressed. "It's home," Thornton replied simply, but there was unmistakable warmth in his voice. As they descended into the valley, a woman emerged from the main house, wiping her hands on her apron. In her 50s, with steel-gray hair pulled back in a severe bun, she watched their approach with obvious curiosity. "That's Mrs. Abernathy," Thornton explained. "Runs the house, keeps us all fed. Her bark is worse than her bite, but only just." Sage felt a flutter of anxiety. Would this woman welcome her, or see her as an intrusion, or worse, a fallen woman unworthy of respect? They drew up to the hitching post outside the house, and Thornton dismounted in one fluid motion before coming to help Sage down from Daisy. As her feet touched the ground, the baby gave a particularly forceful kick, causing her to gasp and press a hand to her side. "You all right?" Thornton asked, his hand still at her elbow. "Yes," she assured him. "Just an active little one." Mrs. Abernathy approached, her sharp eyes taking in Sage's condition without comment. "This the young lady you telegraphed about, Mr. Thornton?" "It is," he confirmed. "Miss Sage Crawford. This is Mrs. Abernathy." "Madam," Sage said, inclining her head respectfully. Mrs. Abernathy's expression softened slightly. "You look about done in, child. Come inside and sit down before you fall down." The housekeeper's direct manner was oddly comforting. She led Sage into the house while Thornton took care of the horses. The interior was surprisingly well appointed, with solid furniture, colorful rugs, and shelves lined with books. A fire burned cheerfully in the large stone fireplace, taking the chill from the air. "Sit," Mrs. Abernathy instructed, pointing to a comfortable chair near the fire. "I'll fetch you some tea and something to eat. When's that baby due?" "About 2 months," Sage replied, easing herself into the chair with a sigh of relief. The older woman gave her a critical once-over. "Looks sooner to me, but what do I know? Only helped bring a dozen babies into the world." Before Sage could respond to this revelation, Mrs. Abernathy disappeared into what must have been the kitchen, returning shortly with a tray bearing tea, bread, and stew. "Eat," she commanded. "Then I'll show you to the cabin. Mr. Thornton had the men fixing it up all yesterday and this morning." Sage felt a rush of gratitude at this evidence of Thornton's consideration. That was kind of him. "Kind isn't a word most associate with Brody Thornton," Mrs. Abernathy said, watching Sage closely. "But he's a fair man. Gives more chances than most deserve." "Including me?" Sage asked quietly. Mrs. Abernathy's expression softened further. "Child, we've all needed second chances. Some of us third and fourth ones, too. What matters is what you do with them." The simplicity and truth of this statement brought unexpected tears to Sage's eyes. She blinked them away, focusing on her food. After she had eaten, Mrs. Abernathy led her outside and down a well-worn path that branched off from the main house. About 200 yards away stood a small but sturdy cabin, recently whitewashed, with a porch that wrapped around 2 sides. Smoke rose from its chimney, indicating that someone had already lit a fire within. "It's not fancy," Mrs. Abernathy said as they approached, "but it's clean and dry. 2 rooms living area with a kitchen corner, and a bedroom. Outhouse is around back. There's a pump for water right outside." Inside, the cabin was indeed simple but comfortable. A braided rug covered most of the plank floor in the main room, which contained a table and chairs, a small sofa, and a rocking chair placed near the fireplace. The kitchen area had a cast iron stove, shelves stocked with basic supplies, and a dry sink. Through an open door, Sage could see a bedroom containing a bed covered with a colorful quilt and a chest of drawers with a mirror hanging above it. Mr. Thornton had the men bring in some things from the attic of the main house, Mrs. Abernathy explained, seeing Sage's surprise at how well furnished the cabin was. "Said no reason for them to gather dust when they could be of use." Sage ran her hand over the smooth wood of the rocking chair, imagining herself sitting there with her baby. "It's more than I could have hoped for." "Well," Mrs. Abernathy said briskly, though her eyes were kind, "get yourself settled in. Rest today. Tomorrow's soon enough to start working. I'll send one of the hands over with supper later." Left alone in the cabin, Sage unpacked her few possessions, then sat in the rocking chair by the fire, allowing herself to truly relax for the first time in months. Outside, she could hear the sounds of the ranchmen calling to each other, horses nickering, the distant lowing of cattle. Ordinary sounds of life continuing, reassuring in their normalcy. As dusk fell, a knock at the door roused her from a light doze. Expecting one of the ranch hands with her supper, she was surprised to find Brody Thornton himself standing on her porch, a covered tray in his hands. "Mrs. Abernathy was busy with the men's supper," he explained, seeming almost awkward as he held out the tray. "Thought I'd bring this over myself, see if you're settling in all right." Sage stepped back, inviting him in. "Please come in. Everything is wonderful. I don't know how to thank you." Thornton set the tray on the table, removing the cloth to reveal a hearty meal of roast chicken, potatoes, greens, and fresh bread. "No need for thanks. Like I said, you'll earn your keep. Even so, your kindness is unexpected." Sage hesitated, then added, "Given your reputation, I mean." A shadow crossed his face. Reputations aren't always earned, Miss Crawford. Sometimes they're given to you by others who don't know the whole story. The statement resonated deeply with Sage, who had felt the sting of judgment since her condition became known. I understand that better than most. Thornton nodded, seeming to appreciate that she didn't press for details. Mrs. Abernathy says you should rest tomorrow. Get your bearings. Day after, if you're feeling up to it, you can start helping with whatever suits your condition. I'd like that, Sage said, genuinely eager to be useful. I can cook, so clean whatever's needed. Mrs. Abernathy will be glad of the help, he said. She puts on a tough front, but she's not as young as she once was. An awkward silence fell between them, neither quite knowing how to continue. Finally, Thornton cleared his throat. I'll leave you to your supper, then. Good night, Miss Crawford. Good night, Mr. Thornton, she replied. And thank you again. After he left, Sage sat at the table, contemplating her meal and the strange turns of fate that had brought her here. A week ago, she would never have imagined finding sanctuary on the ranch of a man feared throughout the territory. Yet here she was, warm, fed, and for the first time in months, not afraid of what tomorrow might bring. The days that followed settled into a rhythm that surprised Sage with its comfortable predictability. True to her word, she began helping Mrs. Abernathy with household tasks, mending clothes, baking bread, preserving the last of the garden's harvest for winter. The work was steady but not overwhelming, and Mrs. Abernathy proved to be a patient teacher and, increasingly, a friend. Brody Thornton remained something of an enigma. He was often away from the ranch, seeing to business in neighboring towns or working with his men on the far reaches of his property. When their paths did cross, he was unfailingly polite but reserved, asking after her health but rarely engaging in extended conversation. Yet Sage found herself watching for him, noticing the way he interacted with his men, firm but fair, earning their respect rather than demanding it. She observed how he treated the animals with quiet gentleness, speaking to his horses in low tones that carried across the yard. And she saw how, despite his reputation, the ranch hands and their families looked to him not with fear but with loyalty. As her time grew closer, Sage began preparing for the baby's arrival with Mrs. Abernathy's help. They sewed tiny gowns and blankets from fabric Thornton brought back from his trips to town, and converted a drawer from the chest into a makeshift cradle that could be placed beside Sage's bed. One evening, as the first snow of winter dusted the ground outside, Sage sat by her fire, finishing the hem on a small blanket. A knock at the door announced Mrs. Abernathy, bearing a covered basket. Thought you might like some company, the older woman said, setting the basket on the table. Brought some of those apple dumplings you were helping with earlier. I'd love company, Sage said truthfully. While she valued her independence, the long evenings alone sometimes weighed heavily. Mrs. Abernathy settled herself in a chair opposite Sage's rocker, producing knitting from a bag at her side. For a time, they worked in companionable silence, the only sounds the click of knitting needles and the crackle of the fire. You're good for this place, Mrs. Abernathy said suddenly, not looking up from her work. Brought some life back to it. Sage paused in her sewing, touched by the unexpected comment. I've only been here a few weeks. Long enough, the older woman replied. Mr. Thornton's been different since you came. Less isolated. Sage thought about this. It was true that in recent days, Thornton had begun stopping by her cabin more frequently, sometimes bringing small gifts, a book he thought she might enjoy, a jar of honey from a farm down the valley, once even a sprig of late-blooming wildflowers he'd found sheltered in a rocky outcrop. He's been kind, Sage acknowledged carefully. Mrs. Abernathy gave her a shrewd look. He's been interested. There's a difference. Sage felt heat rise to her cheeks. Mrs. Abernathy, I'm in no position to, course you're not, The housekeeper interrupted. Not now, anyway. But that baby won't be inside you forever. And when it's born, you'll have choices to make. What do you mean? Sage asked, though she suspected she knew. Mrs. Abernathy set her knitting in her lap, fixing Sage with a direct gaze. You could stay on as hired help, raise your child here. Or you could take whatever savings you manage and try your luck elsewhere. Or, she left the third option unspoken, but it hung in the air between them. Mr. Thornton has never given any indication that he sees me as anything but someone in need of assistance, Sage said, focusing on her sewing once more. That man wouldn't know how to court a woman if you gave him written instructions, Mrs. Abernathy snorted. But I've known him 5 years, and I've never seen him bring wildflowers to anyone before. Before Sage could formulate a response, a sharp pain gripped her abdomen, causing her to gasp and drop her sewing. Mrs. Abernathy was at her side in an instant. How long you been having pains? She demanded. On and off since this morning, Sage admitted. But nothing serious until now. Mrs. Abernathy's expression turned businesslike. Right then. Looks like that little one's coming early after all. I told you it would. The next hours passed in a blur of pain and exertion. Mrs. Abernathy sent one of the ranch hands for the midwife who lived in a nearby settlement. But it quickly became apparent that the baby would arrive before help could reach them. With efficiency born of experience, the housekeeper transformed Sage's bedroom into a birthing chamber, heating water, laying out clean linens, and preparing everything they would need. Through it all, she talked Sage through each contraction, offering encouragement and practical advice in equal measure. Outside, the snow fell more heavily, and wind began to howl around the cabin's eaves. Where's Mr. Thornton? Sage asked during a brief respite between pains. Rode out to the north pasture this morning with some of the men, Mrs. Abernathy replied. They'll be back when they can, but in this weather might not be until morning. Sage nodded, oddly disappointed despite knowing that Thornton's presence would have been inappropriate. Another contraction seized her, stronger than before, and she cried out. That's it, Mrs. Abernathy encouraged. Baby's coming now. Bear down when I tell you. What followed was the most challenging and transformative experience of Sage's life. Just as the mantel clock struck midnight, with snow piling against the windows and wind singing in the chimney, her daughter was born tiny but healthy, with a shock of dark hair and lungs that announced her arrival with impressive vigor. She's perfect, Mrs. Abernathy declared, placing the swaddled infant in Sage's arms after cleaning and examining her. A fighter, like her mama. Sage gazed down at her daughter's face, overcome with a love so fierce it took her breath away. This child, born of a union that had brought her nothing but pain, now represented everything good and hopeful in her world. Eleanor, she whispered, the name coming to her with certainty. Eleanor Grace Crawford. Beautiful name for a beautiful girl, Mrs. Abernathy approved, bustling around the room to tidy up. Now you rest while you can. She'll be wanting to eat soon enough. Exhausted but exhilarated, Sage drifted into a light sleep with Eleanor nestled against her chest. She dreamed of open skies and wildflowers, of a deep voice reading stories by firelight, of strong hands that offered protection without demanding submission. Brody, she murmured in her sleep, the name feeling right on her lips. She woke to find Mrs. Abernathy watching her with knowing eyes. Said his name in your sleep, the older woman commented. Twice now. Before Sage could respond, a commotion outside announced the return of riders. Moments later, heavy footsteps sounded on the porch, followed by an urgent knock. Come in, Mrs. Abernathy called, and the door opened to reveal Brody Thornton, snow melting on his shoulders, his expression a mixture of concern and something Sage couldn't quite identify. Mrs. Abernathy, he began, then stopped abruptly as his gaze fell on Sage and the bundle in her arms. For a long moment, he stood frozen in the doorway, seemingly at a loss for words. "Well, don't just stand there letting in the cold," Mrs. Abernathy scolded. "Come meet Miss Eleanor Grace." Thornton approached the bed slowly, removing his hat as if entering a church. His eyes, usually so guarded, were wide with wonder as he looked down at the sleeping infant. "She came early," Sage explained softly. "Just after midnight." "She's beautiful," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Like her mother." The simple compliment, delivered with such sincerity, brought tears to Sage's eyes. "Would you like to hold her?" Thornton looked startled, then uncertain. "I don't know how. My hands aren't made for holding something so small." "Nonsense," Mrs. Abernathy declared. "Every hand can learn to hold a baby." She took Eleanor from Sage and deftly transferred her to Thornton's arms, arranging his hands to support the infant's head and body. The sight of this formidable man cradling her daughter with such tender care undid something in Sage's heart. She watched as Eleanor opened her eyes, regarded Thornton solemnly for a moment, then closed them again, apparently content in his embrace. "She trusts you," Sage observed. "Don't know why she should," he replied, but his expression as he gazed down at the child belied his words. "I'm not exactly known for my gentle nature. Perhaps she sees what others don't," Sage suggested. Mrs. Abernathy cleared her throat pointedly. "I'll just go fix some breakfast," she announced. "Mr. Thornton, you'll stay and keep an eye on things here while I'm gone." It wasn't a question, and Thornton didn't treat it as one. "Yes, madam," he replied, still not taking his eyes off Eleanor. After Mrs. Abernathy left, a silence fell between them, not uncomfortable, but charged with unspoken thoughts. Finally, Thornton handed Eleanor back to Sage with careful movements. "Mrs. Abernathy said you spoke my name," he said, his voice deliberately casual. "While you were sleeping." Sage felt heat rise to her cheeks, but she met his gaze directly. "Did she tell you what else I said?" "No," he admitted. "Just that." Sage took a deep breath, gathering courage. "I was dreaming of a future," she said. "A future where Eleanor grows up safe and loved. Where she has what I didn't: stability, security, a place to belong." "She can have that here," Thornton said quickly. "You both can. You don't have to leave when you're recovered." "As your employee?" Sage asked, needing clarity. Thornton looked away, then back, something like determination settling over his features. "No, not as my employee." "Then as what?" she pressed, heart hammering in her chest. "As my wife," he said, the words coming out in a rush. "If you'd consider it. I know it's sudden, and I know what people say about me, that I'm too harsh, too uncompromising for marriage. But I would try to be better, for you and for Eleanor." The proposal, unexpected yet somehow inevitable, left Sage momentarily speechless. This man, who had shown her nothing but respect and kindness since their unusual first meeting, was offering her and her daughter a home, a family. "People say many things," she said finally, "about you, about me. But I've learned that what matters isn't what people say, but what is true. And the truth is, I've come to care for you, Brody Thornton, harsh edges and all." Hope flickered in his eyes. "Is that a yes?" "It's a let's not rush," Sage replied honestly. "I need time to recover, to find my footing as a mother. And you need time to be certain this is what you want: a ready-made family, with all the complications that entails." Thornton nodded, accepting her wisdom. "Fair enough. But my offer stands. Whenever you're ready." "In the meantime," Sage said, smiling down at Eleanor, who had begun to stir in her arms, "I think we could all benefit from getting to know each other better. I'd like that Thornton replied, and for the first time since she'd known him, he smiled fully, a transformation that lit his entire face and made Sage's heart skip a beat. As winter gave way to spring, Sage and Eleanor remained at the ranch, settling into a rhythm of days marked by small joys and growing connections. Thornton proved to be a frequent visitor to their cabin, often arriving in the evenings with a book to read aloud while Sage nursed Eleanor or worked on mending. Sometimes he simply sat with them, the comfortable silence of shared space more eloquent than words. With the first wildflowers of April came Sage's answer. Standing in the doorway of her cabin, watching Thornton approach with a handful of blue lupins and a question in his eyes, she knew with certainty that this was where she belonged, with this man who had proven himself not harsh but steadfast, not too proud but deeply loving. "Yes," she said simply as he reached her, taking the flowers from his hand and threading her fingers through his. "My answer is yes." They were married in May, beneath an arch of blossoming apple trees in the ranch's small orchard. Eleanor, now 5 months old and growing stronger by the day, watched the proceedings from Mrs. Abernathy's arms, occasionally reaching out toward her mother and new father with delighted gurgles. The townspeople of Durango, who had once whispered behind Sage's back and warned that Brody Thornton was too harsh for marriage, now spoke of the transformation of the fearsome cowboy, how he smiled more freely, how his voice softened when he spoke to his wife and daughter. They marveled at how the pregnant woman who had once cowered behind a water trough had brought such change to a man they thought beyond redemption. But Sage knew the truth was both simpler and more profound. They had each recognized in the other a kindred spirit, someone who understood that life's hardships could either break you or forge you into something stronger. Together, they had chosen strength, and in doing so, had found a love that defied expectations and transcended judgment. As they stood on the porch of their home one summer evening, watching the sunset paint the western sky in hues of gold and crimson, Eleanor sleeping peacefully in her father's arms, Sage leaned her head against Thornton's shoulder. "Happy?" he asked, the word a warm breath against her hair. "Completely," she replied, and meant it with every fiber of her being. For in finding each other, they had discovered that reputations and rumors held no power over hearts brave enough to see the truth. And the truth was this. In a world that had been harsh to them both, they had created something gentle, a family built on understanding, respect, and a love that had begun with a name spoken in sleep, but now filled every waking moment with its quiet, enduring strength.